The market doesn't know what keeps you up at night. It doesn't know when you want to retire, and it doesn't know how old you are. The simple truth is, the market doesn't care. But if you care, you've tuned into the right place. You're listening to Investor Resources, bringing clarity to the confusing world of finance. Here are your hosts of Investor Resources, Don Creech and Perry Sykes.
I'm Don Creech.
And I'm Perry Sykes, and welcome to the Investor Resources Podcast. I'd like to invite you all to subscribe to our podcast so you're getting the latest version at all times. And if you're enjoying these or finding them informative, feel free to forward those links on to your friends and your family, coworkers. Give them a chance to see what we're doing here. We would appreciate that a great deal. Thank you.
Well, today we're talking about investor mistakes. And there's a long list, but we're not going to cover all of them.
Thank goodness, yeah.
But it does remind me of one of my retired physician clients. Now, physicians are smart. They have to be smart to get through med school.
Oh, yeah.
And residency and all the other stuff they have to do. Anyway, this client and I were talking about his options in the market. And he said, and we're talking about some stock that he'd inherited and what to do with it. And he said, listen, you got to do the work. That's why I hire you. He said, I figured out that every time I bought stocks, they went down. And every time I sold stocks, they went up. And I did that for years. I just got tired of doing it. That's why I have you. You figure out and you take care of it. Well, but many people don't want an advisor because it looks so easy on the surface. One of the ways to protect yourself is, by definition, have some diversification. And if you're conservative and don't want to lose money, another way that is commonly touted is to simply buy dividend stocks because they have positive cash flow, or at least they're supposed to have positive cash flow.
Right.
Free cash flow can be used for multiple purposes, one of which is to sustain dividend payout. Well, if I'm getting dividend, isn't that all that matters? That's a common question for an investor. And the answer is no, that is not all that matters.
Although some people will tell you it is. I know I've seen Mark Cuban, a billionaire, on Shark Tank. I've seen him online saying, ignore everything else. Buy dividends. That's the only secret to the stock market. Buy something with a dividend and ignore the rest. It's like, wow, that's startlingly bad advice. Anytime anybody tells you there's one kind of anything to buy in the equity markets all the time, that's going to be bad advice. And you should remember that. And don't forget, there's a wide range of things to look at in the stock market. It's never one factor. It's never one thing that makes all stocks good or bad.
Well, part of the assumption is that you don't need to worry about how much capital you actually have in your account if you have dividends. Now, over the years, I have met people who have been very committed buy and hold investors to dividend stocks. And assuming, well, in these cases, they did hold through long-term bear markets.
Right.
And they closed their eyes and did not read their account statement. As long as the checks showed up, that's all they cared about. And if that's you, then maybe this will actually work if you have enough time to accumulate enough shares in a company that does not disrupt its dividend payout. And that does happen. Finances go bad. Their competitive market share dominance goes bad. Management goes bad. There's an accounting error. They get bought out. The dividend goes away. There are still things you need to pay attention to. But if you happen to be one of the lucky ones that never has a problem with the company that you invest in, and they never quit paying their dividend, and you ignore 25, 35, 50% drops in value over time, then go to sleep. I mean, good for you. But when you look at your alternatives, maybe you should consider some more active management or paying attention to what's going on. And then Perry found this article I don't remember exactly where you picked it up, Terry, but I'm going to show this chart on the screen. This chart actually compares the Vanguard High Dividend Yield Index, the ticker is V, Victor, Y, M, Mary, compared to the S&P 500 Total Return Index, and that's SPXTR for total return.
There you go.
Now, this is an easy question. This is a 20-year chart, and over 20 years, you're accumulating stocks that are paying dividends. And this is total dividends, so both of these include dividend payments into your account. Which line do you want your account to be? The purple one or the orange one?
There
The
you go.
purple one is the all dividend account, and the orange one is the SPX, the S&P 500, with dividends. Now, the S&P 500 looks like it has a little bit more volatility associated right in here with the pandemic issue. And they're both pretty similar. Actually, this is the pandemic issue right here, the 2020.
There you go.
And they were pretty similar to the great financial collapse. They were tracking along. It wasn't a lot of difference. So that's part of this close correlation is part of the reason people say, just buy dividends and don't worry about it. It's all the same. Except that post the great financial collapse, there's a major change in the way large pools of money manage their accounts. This is not your grandfather's stock market. And we can see that as the S&P 500 with dividends has substantially outpaced the dividend-only concentration policy. Which line do you want to be in your account? That's a valid question.
And you
That
should always
requires
ask yourself, multiple questions. Back, like you said, Don, during the Great Financial Crisis, if you were buying, high dividends, you were going to own lots of financial institutions, banks, mortgage companies. Guess who got clobbered the hardest? That's who got really hit. And so buying those dividends does not guarantee you any insulation from outside influences that can affect those markets. It doesn't mean you're not going to have volatility. Oil companies were really big on dividends. Last 10 years, have oil companies been just steady as a rock, or they've kind of run into some problems here and there with some price volatilities over those barrels of oil? So it doesn't buy you any safety. It doesn't buy you any protection against volatility. It does make sure that you're not looking for total return in the market, though. You're giving up growth. And right now, in a high growth market, that means you pay the price for ignoring that. And there is no single type of equity that is so outperforming all the time that you should ignore everything else. It just doesn't exist. And that includes dividends. And it doesn't matter if you're looking at, dividend aristocrats that have paid, never lowered a dividend for the past decade. Doesn't matter. It does not matter. There's no single factor that should rule what makes it into your equity allocations.
So it's really a matter of paying attention instead of just simply saying, well, they pay dividends, that's all I need to worry about.
Yeah.
It's really important to actually look at the fundamentals and see how are they paying the dividend. Are they borrowing money? Are they financing it by going out to the marketplace and buying bonds and using that money in order to continue paying the dividend, making it appear as though they're more profitable than they are because they're sustaining the dividend? Maybe they're using that money to pay for stock buybacks to prop up corporate CEO, and they know if they quit paying the dividend, investors will run away from the company, and that'll hurt corporate CEO, CFO compensation, because most compensation from corporate officers today is in the price of the stock and stock options, so that you can have a dividend payment with the company that's actually in financial high risk operating status.
Correct.
And you should be paying attention to that, because something that disrupts the ability to continue that weak financial status can collapse the stock and your dividend payment at the same time.
Right.
Then you're going to say, man, I didn't see that coming, but you're going to be in a world of pain already.
This article came from Josh Brown's blog. Josh Brown is the the CEO of Ritholtz Capital Management, and he's got a quote in there. It says, "Plenty of formerly high-quality companies pay steady dividends on their way to becoming low-quality companies." So they'll pay that dividend as the nature of the company deteriorates. So you have to do more looking. You can't just rely at that steady dividend on that steady dividend as saying, well, the company's in great shape. Like you just pointed out, Don, not always true. And if you're just looking at that dividend, you're going to miss it. And you're ending up holding a low quality company, which means you're in a high risk situation. And you're thinking just the opposite. They've been paying this dividend out, so they're probably a very safe company. And the opposite is true. So as always, you need to look that gift horse in the mouth and see what you're actually holding on to there.
So you can go to Y Charts. There are places online that you can find financial research on companies that's relatively free. You can subscribe to various databases. It costs you not an arm and a leg, but they're going to cost you a few bucks to be able to get that information so you don't have to go to the SEC, which you could do. You go to the SEC and the New York Stock Exchange and dig through financial statements yourself. But most investors aren't that intrigued with reading financial statements and footnotes. So a subscription to a website that does the financial fundamental research for you, if you're a dividend investor, is probably worth your while.
Sure.
One we use to simplify that research is Chaikin Analytics. And it's, costs you a few bucks, but it's not that expensive if you're a serious investor and you have a decent sized portfolio. You can hire somebody to do that work for you. That's one of the things we do in terms of building portfolios is we take care of that side on our side.
And we're not saying don't look at dividends. We're not saying dividends are a terrible thing. Avoid dividends. Dividends are great, but capital gains are great also. And there's just no reason. Why pick one? Why pick one and just obsess on one side of that? Look at the total return. That's what's important to your portfolio, and go with the flow. If the big capital gains and the big total returns are coming from growth stocks that aren't paying a lot of dividends, there's nothing wrong with being there while that's the nature of the market. If everything changes and all of a sudden valuations are overstretched and all of a sudden all those high flying growth stocks are no longer returning anything, and the only place to find return in a stagnant market is some dividends, buy some dividends. But don't hold one over the other all the time. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's just basically a function of rotation, which we do with our portfolio strategy. Yep. All of our portfolios, the ones we run for individuals and the 5 models that we run for 401k plans, all are basic rotation strategies. Rotate into strength. If it's working, own it. When it quits working, shift to something that is. Nothing works all the time. Markets are dynamic, and this year, 2025, we expect with all the changes that are in front of us from a regulatory standpoint, tax standpoint, immigration standpoint, federal bank standpoint, there's plenty of things for this market to take a temporary setback and pause and say, how do we figure this stuff out?
Right.
Pay attention. Be willing to make an adjustment. Just don't get married to the investment and say, this is the only thing I need to do. We addressed that issue similarly in another podcast that we did recently on target date funds. And if you're in a 401k plan and haven't seen that, go find it on our YouTube channel and pay attention to that. If you're in a retirement plan, you need to understand the risk associated with target date funds. They're not dissimilar to the risk associated with being committed to a dividend strategy 100%. And we include dividends in our models. So when they're at the top of the list, that's what we buy. When they aren't doing so well, the model switches. That's pretty easy from a conceptual standpoint. Anyway, if this was of interest to you, you think it'd be interest to some of your friends or coworkers, family members, pass the link along to them. We appreciate your sharing it. Subscribe. It's easy to do. Click on the button that's on the screen just below here, and you'll be informed of the next one that we update. Have a great day, and we wish you all a very prosperous new year as it unfolds before our very eyes.